and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Hi, Bodhisattvas, Ekosattvas. It's really nice to see all of you. It's nice to see you, Christy, from Phoenix, right? I love it when we are affirmed in a palpable way that we are so interconnected across time and place. The Ekosattva vows. I vow to myself and to each of you to commit myself daily to the healing of our world and the welfare of all beings. The Jataka tales. People have begun, because I get to talk to people in Dokusan, people have begun telling me memories of their own Jataka tales, of things that penetrated childhood memories. Current day stories. Dog bodhisattvas. They're everywhere. We're everywhere. Once you start looking with wide and deep eyes, we are not the only ones here. I had memories are so funny the way they just pop up. One of the things I got to experience on this trip is, I mean, I'd seen it on movies or heard about it, but I'd never seen a prairie dog village. Have you ever seen a prairie dog village? I mean, it's like there's all these little holes and they're all just like upright and they're all talking to each other. And one sends out a message and it seems to ripple through the whole community. And anyway, I loved seeing and camping right on the edge of a prairie dog village. Who knows? Sometimes I think, you know, what is right? There are gopher villages and there are ant villages and wasps, and there are so many worlds within worlds, and we just mostly skip across the top of it, and if we're lucky, don't do a lot of harm. So in case you haven't figured this out, usually when we endeavor some area of study like the Jataka tales, it's because I have some curiosity and it gives me a chance to study more deeply and to share it with you. So I've been finding out things I had no idea about, and I intend to continue to do that and share it. I'm going to share one of the stories today that is one of the more well-known ones that affected me really deeply a long time ago. But then on Thursday, I didn't know that Ryokan, the Zen poet, actually did a whole commentary on another Jataka. These stories have gotten people's attention for a long time across time and space. May they be seeds that drop deeply in our hearts and our psyches. Maybe you noticed in the newsletter, and I'll continue to do it, I hope you'll enjoy it or at least tolerate it, is there's so much art that's come out of these. And again, I do hope that that continues to be ignited and flow through us in a way that can be playful and illuminating, or haiku, or whatever. Let's not leave these as dead stories in the past. Maybe you've heard the story. Doesn't matter because I'm going to tell it to you again anyway, of the hungry tigress. You'll see, I think. Is like it's an unimaginable story. Is how could this, I don't even understand. It seems impossible, this story. And I know it works on my heart, the question of what is it to save all beings? Moment after moment, in acts big and small. How do we go beyond this self? How do we offer this self? How do we embody and manifest our interconnection? Because I Googled Jataka tales, I found an article, an old one from, I think, 1991 from Tricycle by, I think his name's Andrew Schelling, Andrew Schelling. Here's something he reminds us of. Mahayana Buddhism charges one to regard every creature possessing a nervous system, however rudimentary, as mother-like. Never heard quite that language before. Tibetans say all beings are your mother, were your mother. Of course, in the West, we all go, ah! but in other cultures, that actually was like a deep, deep love. And I've been noticing that the longer my mother and others are gone, the more deeply I love them, the sense of gratitude, being given a human life and everything she taught me. He says, the texts speak of mother-like sentient beings. In the beginningless round of birth and rebirth, say the intricate commentaries, in the perennially growing garland of Jatakas, the perennially growing garland of Jatakas, every incarnate creature has at some point been our mother. This vision, as urgent in today's world as it is tender, is also an expression of how lonely we as human beings will feel the day there are no more spotted owls, no more ivory-tusked mammals, no whales, no clean beaches, no old-growth forests. So close to our actual future, this loneliness, and many have begun to suffer it grievously, is the resurgence of Jataka mind. So I like that what we're doing is bringing to life Jataka mind, Jataka heart, mind. He goes on to say, the Jataka tales gather some of the earliest and strangest writings preserved in the Buddhist heritage. Jataka or Jataka, I think, I don't know which is, means birth. The stories occur in a rough-hewn prose studied with cryptic shards of a much older verse. It is in these broken oddments of poetry that you find something remarkably ancient. Animal tales dating in all likelihood to Paleolithic times. Folklore and archaeology. I mean, if you go to ancient caves, there's animals there. Maybe human handprint, maybe a few little stick figures, but amazing animals. Folklore and archaeology suggests that the Jataka's interest in wild animal personalities is not an isolated instance. The earliest pictorial art largely depicts mammals. Spain, southern France, comparable rock art survives across the planet. There is every reason to believe that the earliest verbal art was concerned with similar themes. And then he says, I do believe that the Jataka tales register the first instance in written literature, although it started as oral, of what he'd call cross-species compassion, or Jataka mind, an immediate and unqualified empathy shown towards creatures not of one's own biological species. Perhaps the tales retain traces of a universal contract between living beings. So long ago vanished that no one remembers its ancient imperatives. Now, because I just came back from the prairies and spent some time as best I could beginning to understand the stories and the suffering and the ancient myths of the Plains Indians. Of course, animals are included in these birth stories and this mythology. It's like it's only us who are kind of living well up in our heads that have forgotten our ancient relatives. With a bow to the old stories, Jataka mind is that conscious human behavior which bears a whiff of that old way of thinking. Tales meant to awaken a notion of kinship that sweeps across animal species and often show animals to be of an equal, often a higher ethical order than humans. I was remembering a Jungian therapist who, when people would bring him dreams about animals, and because we're Western and we're psychological, we would think that the dreams were about us, is like, who's the whale in me? And he said, well, that's true sometimes, but maybe it's the whale coming into your dream to tell you something. Maybe they sneak into our zazen and our dreams to get our attention in ways that when we're cognizing, we just can't let in. So here's something I learned. This Jataka mind, animal mind, deep mind, species mind, interspecies mind is in the Diamond Sutra. The Buddha announces an unqualified brother and sisterhood of creatures. The Diamond Sutra, who knew? Maybe I read this and then kind of went over it because there were more important emptiness stories to go to in the Diamond Sutra. One should produce a thought in this manner. As many beings as there are in the universe of beings, comprehended under the term beings, egg-born, born from a womb, moisture-born or miraculously born, with or without form, with perception, without perception, and with neither perception nor non-perception, as far as any conceivable form of being is conceived. As far as any conceivable form of being is conceived, all these I must lead out of misery. So you thought you just had to save human beings. You didn't know that we also are taking a vow to save egg-born, born from the womb, moisture-born, those with forms, perception. Good heavens. And this has inspired human beings and Buddhists and offered support across time and space. Maybe you saw in the newsletter some of the carvings of the monkey king that I told on Thursday that are in ancient temples. They're in the Dongshuan caves. I'm going to send you pictures of this one about the hungry tiger that's in the Dongshuan caves that are, I've always wanted to visit there, but the Getty Museum did a traveling exhibit of the Dongshuan caves, and I got to go in it that way. Dongshuan caves are amazing works of art. They were on the Silk Road at the crossroads. Borobudur, amazing carvings, which I've also gotten to see. The Ajantas are there. In Japan, it's in a 7th century shrine in Japan. And in Nepal, they're everywhere. Good heavens. So this one, the Hungry Tiger, is from the Jataka Mala from 400 AD, where a poet, Aryashura, put this together, made a garland of the stories. And this story is the first one that he chose to bring forward. I'm going to read you. I'm using Rafe Martin's translations. He practiced with Erica Wilde. They practiced together at the Rochester Zen Center many years ago, and she's going to ask him if he'll come and tell us some stories. I'm indebted to him because it was through him when I got interested. He was my first access point. So, you ready for the tigress? It's because the stories were arranged at that time through the perfection, through the paramitas. And the first paramita, as we know, is generosity. It's the ground of everything. So this is a story about the perfection of generosity or selfless giving. Make sure you listen with zazen body breath, because this is a kind of unsettling story for the self. Long, long ago, ages before the Bodhisattva attained perfect enlightenment and became the Buddha of our world age known as Shakyamuni, he was born into a family of wealthy Brahmins. He grew up learning the wisdom, rituals, and skills of his station. When he was grown, he was honored. Nobles saw that he had the bearing of a king. The wise looked up to him as a sage. Warriors and merchants felt he had the wisdom of a leader. He was also a naturally gifted teacher, drawn to guiding others along a path of selfless generosity, which in time he decided was his true calling. So he left the city for the forest, where he established a hermitage for those seeking to enter the higher life. One day, years later, now a teacher, he was walking in the forest with one of his disciples. It had not rained for some weeks. Oh, here we are. The trees were bare, the grass brittle, and the stream beds nearly dry. The trees were bare, the grass brittle, and the stream beds nearly dry. Suddenly, they heard a series of coughing roars coming from somewhere very close by. The student listened and said, "Master, those are the roars of a tiger, a hungry tiger. We'd better go back now." Now. But the teacher said, "Wait a moment. Listen again. Listen again. Those are not simply the roars of a hungry tiger. They are the roars of a starving one. Let's go on a bit further and see if there's anything we might do to help." Reluctantly, the disciple agreed, and in a short time they came to the edge of a cliff. Looking down, they saw what was clearly a starving tiger. A tigress, actually, for two small cubs were trying to nurse from her. But every time they approached, the tigress roared miserably and drove them away. She was emaciated, just skin and bones with all her ribs plainly showing. When she looked at her cubs, her eyes narrowed and seemed to glaze over. It was clear that in her desperation, she had begun to view them, her children, as prey, as meat. Quick, said the Bodhisattva to his student. Run and see if you can find some food for this starving animal. She may be driven to eat her own cubs if she doesn't have food soon. The karma arising from that will be terrible. I'll wait here and do what I can to stop her from harming her cubs till you return. So the disciple ran off. The teacher watched him go, then turned back to watch the tigers below. How sad, he thought, watching them. Even as the Bodhisattva watched, he saw the starving tigress struggle to rise up on her front legs, hindquarters still on the ground, and she tried again and again. At last she managed to rise and growling and drooling, tottered unsteadily towards her tiny cubs. The Bodhisattva thought, my disciple is not going to be back with food in time to stop her. But I can't just stand idly by and let this happen. Mind is vast, totally empty, and cannot be found. This body is so much matter, is the crystallization of my own past thoughts and deeds extending back into the endless past. My deepest wish has ever been to save sentient beings. To fail to act when there is opportunity would only be a cause for regret. She removed their robe and hung it on a branch of the tree. Then, like a person preparing to simply dive into a lake, he put his hands together and leapt from the cliff. Startled by the sound of something crashing through the trees and bushes behind her, the tigress crouched down in fear, then turned to look and saw the bloodied body of a man stretched out on the rocks at the base of the cliff. Gathering her remaining strength, she lunged forward and began to feed. When the disciple returned, apologetic and empty-handed, he saw the teacher's robe hanging on the tree at the cliff's edge. He called the teacher's names, but there was no response. Fearing the worst, he went forward and looked down over the cliff's edge and saw the tigress feeding. With a cry, the disciple threw himself to the ground by the base of the tree and wept. At last he arose, dried his eyes, and in awe carried the robe as a sacred relic back to the hermitage. Once there, he told the tale of their teacher's sacrifice to the other disciples, and then he led them all back to the spot. There they festooned the tree with garlands of flowers, and when the tigress and her cubs departed, the disciples all descended the cliff, gathered the Bodhisattva's bones, and built a jeweled stupa in which to house them. The gods, stunned themselves by what they'd witnessed, descended to earth where the Bodhisattva's body had been devoured, and his blood shed and covered the ground with precious incense, fine sandalwood powder, and heavenly perfumes. Even now, the Bodhisattva's selfless deed is remembered by those very gods and by humans too, who know the tale. It will never be forgotten. Even as long ages pass, in which high mountains and great civilizations arise and fall, never to be heard of again. This story sits in my heart and maybe now in yours as a great big Dharma question, of a mystery, of a wonder. Made me think one of the reasons I came to Buddhism was the stories of Tibetan monks and nuns when they were being tortured by their Chinese jailers. Their deepest wish was that they would not experience hate or anger towards the people who were abusing them. I remember early on thinking, I don't understand. But there are human beings who actually live this, which must mean there's something possible here that I haven't yet imagined. Now, I'm not suggesting that any one of us throw ourselves off a cliff to defeat a hungry tiger. Probably couldn't find one anyway, although there's probably, and maybe more than we want to know over time, hungry mountain lions or mountain lions fleeing from the fires and all sorts of other beings. But there's something at the heart of this story that points to something that my mind can't grasp, and I'm grateful for it. Rafe Martin says he's stunned and speechless too. How do you write a commentary to this story? And then he says, the most honest comment I've seen on the tigress Jataka comes from Gary Snyder. You probably know Gary Snyder or have heard of Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder, I don't know what he does anymore, but he founded a Zendo up it was in the Sierras, because we went up there and visited him. And it was wonderful because the Makugio was a tortoise shell. And everything brought in the animal realm into practice and acknowledgement of the land where he was. There's another Jataka that I'll tell you, I think, because I want to later, another time, about the blue bear. And Gary Snyder, maybe you've read his Smokey the Bear Sutra. Maybe you don't know, but I'll share some of that with you too. Gary has been remarkable ancestor in terms of leading the way beyond how most people think Zen should be. But here's his commentary, a brief statement in his Myths and Texts. Buddha fed himself to tigers and donated mountains of eyes through the years to the blind. A mountain lion, he says, once trailed me for 4 miles at night and no gun. It was awful. I didn't want to be ate. I didn't want to be eaten. I didn't want to be ate. Maybe we'll change. Buddha fed himself to tigers and donated mountains of eyes through the years to the blind. A mountain lion once trailed me 4 miles at night and no gun. It was awful. I didn't want to be ate. I didn't want to be eaten. Maybe we'll change. Rafe says, maybe we'll change. So we go to the Zendo. We sit retreats. We take up practices in daily life, practicing with the paramitas. And bit by bit, we start to feed ourselves to a starving tiger. On the job, in the home, moment by moment, selfless giving begins. Maybe it's only a vague and distant ideal to start with, but generosity itself is a life path. One we can begin where we are as we are. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. No matter how small, how tentative that step might be, 1 foot after another. And then one last contemplation from him, because I like the last part of what he says. Well, I like all of it. The tigress Jataka dramatizes noble giving. Dana, the essential paramita or perfection of endless, limitless generosity. The giving up of self that releases birds to the air, flowers to the springtime, and once again unfolds that brocade of glittering stars across the vast night sky. It is only in giving away our eyes and heads that we can begin to see. Only in giving up our bodies that we can begin to feel. Then I think, what is this embodiment that is fully embodied and also going beyond the body that allows us to feel? To feel who we truly are, which is the whole world, which is to feel the suffering of the hungry tigress, to want to do what we can step by step. So I thought, of course, anything this story brings up, which may be a lot of things, uncomfortable things, it's like, I'm not giving up my body. And we are giving up our bodies moment after moment, just by living. I'm giving up my young body. I'm being asked to give up my beliefs about the ability to keep myself safe, separate from other people. Maybe that's one of the gifts of the pandemic. It is one of the gifts. But I really like what Gary Snyder said, because it's so honest. I don't want to be 8. Just leave me alone. And maybe we'll change, because I think that's where we kind of sit, if we're honest, all the time. And sometimes a little more generous than others. It's what we keep studying. So I'm going to divide us into groups of 3. And you'll have